This to me is a very important topic. Personally, it's very important to me because I entered into the rabbi business through the Kiruv world. I was originally doing outreach at an outreach kollel, and then as an outreach shul, and then the shul business took over, and I became a shul rabbi. But the desire to bring unaffiliated Jews back into the fold is something that is generally known as Kiruv, and invariably anyone who works in the Jewish world will in some time, invariably, no matter how insular the community, will interact with either people who are themselves currently not Orthodox or people who are Balei Tshuva. And there's no question that the world of Kiruv has undergone a transition over the last 30 to 40 years. Since the Kiruv movement began around 1970, it's clearly changed and transformed because of the world around us has changed and transformed. Rabbi Karlinsky began this discussion on Friday night. For those of you who were at the Oneg, he talked about the changing face of society and how society itself has changed over the course of time, where there was a sincere desire among certain individuals to be able to find the meaning of life, and that was more important than any other consideration, even the consideration of great material gain. Today it's much more difficult to find those people. Today it's much more difficult to be able to grab people's attention because of the fact that people are very distracted. You know, you just, if you got one of these, it's very easy to lose focus when someone is trying to draw you towards something that's more meaningful than the next 30 seconds of your life. So for those reasons and many, many more that you're going to hear momentarily, the world of Kiruv perforce has changed. There are some who look in the situation in a pessimistic fashion and say, and perhaps even a cynical fashion, and say that the world of Kiruv Rechokim has already had its golden age, and it's now in its denouement. It's in its decline, and we therefore don't have as much to look forward to in the future as before. But there are others who say no, that there may be this may be cyclical, or there just needs to be a way that we change doing business, but that there's plenty of opportunity out there, and there always will be an opportunity to do Kiruv as long as the Jewish people are alive in a pre-Messianic age. And that's really what we'd like to hear from our experts today on the panel. Of course, you all have met Rabbi Karlinsky if you've been here over Shabbos. He's the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivas Darchei Noam Shapels, and is doing wonderful work and has been doing wonderful work ever since the beginning of the Kiruv movement in Eretz Yisrael. We have Rabbi Tzvi Sittner, who is the new rabbi at the village shul, and it's very exciting for us to be able to welcome him here today. I don't think that you've had an opportunity to speak here yet at the BAYT, so this may be your premiere to the Thornhill community, and we're very, very honored that you would take time out of your busy schedule to join us. And of course, many of us know and love our own Rabbi Glenn Black, the CEO of NCSY. All three of these rabbis are doing outstanding work out in the field, and we'd like to ask each of them to provide an opening statement, to which we'll then add some questions and then open up the floor and we'll have a conversation. So first we'll start with our guest, Rav Karlinsky.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, an honor to have an opportunity to share some thoughts with an interested audience. I should make a disclaimer. Should we count it?
We will plug in the
Okay. Is that better? I should make one disclaimer. I have a reputation for not being pro-Kiruv. And that's a very ironic thing to say about me, who's been involved for 40 years in teaching Balei Tshuva. But maybe I'll give you some, if you've heard that attributed to me, not being pro-Kiruv, it's because I want to change the vocabulary. I think that we have misnamed the activity we are involved in and that we should be involved in. The real mitzvos of Kiruv that we find in the Torah are two. One is teaching Torah to Jews. And we can teach Torah to Jews who know a lot of Torah. We teach Torah to Jews who know some Torah. And we teach Torah to Jews who know no Torah. That's one mitzvah, limud Torah. The other mitzvah is hocheach tochiach et amitecha. There is a mitzvah that when one sees a Jew violating the Torah, there is a mitzvah in the Torah to rebuke him. But that has very, very defined criteria and parameters. And one of the statements in the Gemara, Kishem shemitzvah lomar davar hanishma, just as it's a mitzvah to tell somebody something that he can listen to, that he will hear, that he will assimilate, kach mitzvah lo lomar. It's a mitzvah to refrain from saying davar shelo nishma. So I think that our kiruv, our outreach, has to be fashioned and governed by those two principles. We're teaching Torah and we are trying to point out to Jews how to keep mitzvos better. If it's teaching Torah, that's the mitzvah of chinuch. And we have a concept, chanoch l'na'ar al pi darko. We have to educate a child aligned with his personality, aligned with his needs, aligned with what he's capable of doing. So I think that if we focus on those two things, so there's no such thing as Kiruv being dead. It's not possible. As long as there are Jews who don't know Torah, there's a mitzvah to teach them. And there's always a mitzvah to try to bring Jews to keeping mitzvos. Those have to be our core values. Now, there's no question that there have been a couple of major shifts in the outreach world. I'm going to call it the outreach world rather than Kiruv because I've just defined it as not being Kiruv. I've defined it as being chinuch, education. But there are two major changes, I think, that have happened in the 40 years that I'm in the business. One, of course, as the rabbi alluded to, but I don't think he made the point strongly enough, and I will in a minute, is the population of unaffiliated or not knowledgeable Jews to whom we're appealing. Rabbi Noach Weinberg Zatzal used to have the line when a new guy came into Esha Torah back in the late 70s. His opening line was, would you rather be rich or wise? Because there was a population of idealistic truth seekers. And anybody who spent any time after hearing that question obviously said, I'd rather be wise. And that was mostly what Reb Noach heard. And then he said, okay, so why are you then spending your life trying to be rich? Stay here in Esha Torah, learn, and we'll make you wise. Unfortunately, in the last 20 years, if you would throw that question out to most of the potential Baalei Tshuva, would you rather be rich or wise? Without batting an eyelash, the answer would be rich. So that's a problem. So the population to whom we are appealing has changed. The other problem is a little more delicate, and that is the people doing the kiruv, doing the outreach, doing the chinuch, possibly are not as well steeped in Torah as the earlier generations of people doing the chinuch, doing the outreach, doing the kiruv. Okay, and that leads us to the foundation of kiruv, if we want to retain our principles, has to be the transmission of authentic Torah. We shouldn't view ourselves as salesmen. We're not trying to sell a product. We have to be people who are transmitting the Torah. We have to be motivated by chesed. One of the mechayvim that is used to present the Torah imperative of kiruv is the Chafetz Chaim's discussion about chesed. See, but if it's really motivated by chesed, so then it's not just, I care about you if you're not keeping Shabbos. It has to be real caring, and real caring isn't about your mitzvah observance. Real caring is about everything about you. Do you have a job? How's your girlfriend doing? How's your marriage doing? You have a sick aunt. Can I help you with something? As opposed to saying, if you're not going to keep Shabbos, I have to move on to the next customer. And that's a very delicate issue that's been going on, and we have to be aware that it could be that that's one of the reasons that the results are not as successful as they used to be. There's a very important section in Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg's letters. Not a letter, it was actually an article written in honor of a bris, and he talked about the first outreach worker. The first outreach worker was Avram Avinu. How did Avram, which philosophical arguments and which proofs and which sales pitch and which lines did Avram use in order to convince people to believe in God? Says Rav Weinberg, none. The 3DH says very simple, it was chesed. His chesed radiated. That's how he was makarev people. That the idea that a person comes and he takes you in, and wow, this is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're behaving in a godlike way, and this is the idea of the Gemara that says, Sheyehei Shem Shamayim Mitahev Al Yadcha. You want to become a magnet for people to want to be connected to Torah. That's why, and this is the Chiddush of Project Inspire, which has to be focused and has to be activated in a broad way to Balabatim, where you can make a difference in another Jew's life. You have to care. But again, care doesn't just mean, oh, you're keeping Shabbos or Kashrus or this Echsher or that Chumrah. You have to just care about the person. And with a smile and with real caring. And that's Yehei Shem Shamayim Mitahev Al Yadcha. And that's the motivation for trying to bring Jews who are disconnected from Torah back to Torah, because it's not, the Shem Shamayim, the Kiddush Hashem, is not happening the way it could. And that has to be part of the motivation. That has to be part of the curriculum and part of the agenda. Two more points. This is something we spoke about yesterday afternoon, if those of you who were here, and that is the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva. This is already expands beyond Kiruv to our Jewish education, but it's since the Rambam talks about it in Hilchos Tshuva, so we can mention it. Al tomar ein tshuva ela me'averos sheyesh ben maseh. A person shouldn't say that tshuva means that I'll stop violating Shabbos, I'll stop stealing, I'll stop having sexual improprieties, I'll stop eating unkosher food. The Rambam says, no, that's not the extent of tshuva. Just as a person has to do tshuva from those active sins, a person has to look at his midos and do tshuva from bad midos. A big chiddush of the Rambam, tshuva from bad midos. Tshuva from anger, tshuva from impatience, tshuva from being a hedonistic person, tshuva from pursuit of money. So we have to think about whether we're taking self-centered, pleasure-seeking people, and unfortunately that's the population today compared to what it was 30 years ago when they were truth seekers. Today they're pleasure seekers. Today they're self-centered. And if we're going to try to feed them Torah to satisfy that self-centered, pleasure-seeking goal, we have corrupted the Torah and there's no success there. The first thing we have to do, Derech Eretz Kadmal Torah, is we have to show them that they can be higher level people, more godlike, more spiritual. That's the priority, that's the prerequisite, that's the foundation on which we can then build Torah. And I think that has to be a major focus of outreach and chinuch, is to elevate people to a higher spiritual level. One last thing, and this is it's something we need to be very careful of. And unfortunately, we've seen in the last 10 to 15 years something we did not see in the early years of Kiruv. We always saw people who became Baalei Tshuva and they dropped out. Didn't work for them. They tried it for a year, 2 years, and they didn't work. Hopefully, they dropped out before they got married and have kids. Unfortunately, sometimes it was later in the process. But what I never saw until the last 10 years was angry ex-Baalei Tshuva. We always saw ex-Baalei Tshuva, but they weren't angry. Didn't work. Okay. The last 10 years, 15 years, we've seen angry bloggers ranting against Kiruv. How did that happen? So the Rambam warns about that. I guess I'm going to have to say it outside because I just lost the place. The Rambam in Hilchos Shuvah says that a person who does mitzvos all his life, and then at the end he's tohe ala rishonos. He looks back and says, what did I do? Why did I do these mitzvos? The Gemara in Kedushin says, me'abed schar kulam. Just as a Baal Tshuva can undo all of the averos that he did with Tshuva, tohe ala rishonos can undo all the mitzvos that they did. And the practical application of that is to make sure that as we're bringing people along in the Kiruv process, in the growth process, we're doing it very slowly, very delicately, very gently, so that every step that they take, if it doesn't work, they won't feel manipulated. They won't feel that somebody sold them a bill of goods. They'll say, yes, I tried it. It didn't work. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Then we have ex-Baalei Tshuva who are not angry. And we've got to make sure, and here I'll just point out something I've been saying for decades in all of the interactions I've had is NCSY. The way it was done in NCSY has always been the preeminent way, the most successful Kiruv operation, in my opinion, in the history of Kiruv, is NCSY, both because of the population that they're dealing with as well as the way that it's done. And our Kiruv, our outreach, our chinuch tanan from people has to be done very delicately, very gently. There's huge upheavals. It has to be done with sensitivity. And that is going to lead, Bezrat Hashem, to more Jews getting more connected to Torah, and Shem Shamayim Yehe Misahiv Al Yadeinu.
Morning. So, thank you, Rabbi Karlinsky. I think the original statement that I had seen was Kiruv, what was it like 30 years ago and what's it like now? So I could tell you 30 years ago, I had the easiest time connecting to people. At 2 years old, it's like you just connect with everybody. I mean, it was a pleasure. On a serious note, I can't tell you so much about what it's like 30 years ago. I could listen to people like Rabbi Karlinsky, I could listen to others, and I can, read a little bit about what it was like once upon a time. But I can tell you a little bit about what it's like now, at least in my opinion, and the way it seems. First of all, you look around the world. Ner LaElef is one of the Kiruv training programs in Israel, as well as others. So I've seen, I've heard that approximately 2,000 makarvim, 2,000 campus rabbis have been placed on various universities. I don't know if it was throughout the U.S. or throughout the world. I don't remember exactly. I have to look back. I'd have to find where I saw that. 2,000 campus rabbis. You have Chabad, just in the U.S. itself, has 3,200 people. I'm talking couples, rabbis and rebbitzins. Forget about all the other staff that work for Chabad, doing outreach, just in the U.S. alone. Now, 30 years ago, you didn't have this. So anyone that's saying, it's dead, it's dying, the yeshivas are full, people are growing, people are moving. Are things changing in how it's being done? I believe so. When I listen back to some of the classes, the Kiruv training, so to speak, that Reb Noach Weinberg Zatzal had given, it was very much intellectual, just like Rabbi Karlinsky had mentioned. You can engage someone, wise or wealthy. Today, it's like wise or wealthy, and it's like, I don't know, who cares? Like, who's thinking about that anyway? I really do believe that to some degree, it isn't an intellectual conversation initially. Of course, the goal, we're not looking to bring people to Judaism because of Cholent and Alachayim. That's not it. In the end of the day, what we really, it's got to be real. So in the end of the day, people are going to engage and study and ask the questions. But I don't think that that's the initial engagement that we have with people anymore. I don't think it's the initial Hey, why are you here? What's the purpose of life? Most people aren't thinking about those things. And I think it's actually a little bit, once upon a time you could have engaged somebody in that conversation, and I think for the most part it's a little bit different. I think now we forge a relationship. As Rabbi Karlinsky was mentioning, the idea of that Kiruv is really stemming from Chesed. I do believe that same idea that we say in Pirkei Avos, right? Ovis Avriyas U'Makarvin LaTorah. Right? Oiv Shalom, Rodev Shalom, we're all familiar with that. But the concept essentially is that we're with open arms. It's Avas Hashem, it's V'ahavta Recha Kamocha. Right? It's just really, Acheinu Kol Beis Yisrael. That's really what it's about. An interesting thing is that going on with this idea, I also believe that once upon a time, Kiruv was for the Kiruv professional, so to speak. Now, they weren't called Kiruv professionals. They were just people who were trained, who knew how to do Kiruv. They were Talmidei Chachamim, who knew a lot. And they would engage people. They would try to have that conversation. People were receptive. But it wasn't the community doing Kiruv. I think today, more than ever, particularly because it's a chesed, particularly because it's about role modeling, it's about connecting with people with open arms and loving, having real ahava for fellow Jews. So I think more than anything now, more than any time in history, is that Kiruv is going to happen through a community. There's an organization that works off of Rutgers University, the campus Kiruv there. And the Makarvim will tell you that of all their programs there, the one that has had, they say, 98% success, whatever that means, is the one where the students go and spend time in Lakewood, New Jersey. Lakewood Yeshiva, you're familiar with it. You have 6,000 people studying in Lakewood Yeshiva. And they get immersed in the community for like a week-long program, and they develop relationships with the people there. And essentially, the community just welcomes them with open arms. The individual, the rabbi, the rebbitzin, the makarvim, the teachers, they're not the ones to, they can be there on the front lines, they could try to connect with people, but in the end of the day, the real kiruv is going to happen with a community. It really takes a community, it takes a village. That being said, I'll just share something, perhaps interesting about what I'm doing. When I first came here, I met with a couple people, some people that were themselves Balei Tshuva. And even with the experience that I've had years prior to arriving in Toronto, I said, tell me, what do you think every Baal Tshuva has? What do you think every Baal Tshuva needs? What do they have in common? What are the necessary ingredients to be makar of somebody? And the answers that I got, the common denominator answer that I got again and again and again and again, was that they need a role model, a family that they can connect to, who's not the rabbi, who's not the rebbitzin. And with that, based on that idea, we connected with a shul that's just a few-minute walk from our shul, the Viewmount shul. And what has happened is incredible. We take 20 guys from the Viewmount community. We take 20 guys from our own shul, and we pair them up to learn together. Now, this is essentially myself and my wife and staff stepping out and saying to all the Jewish community, the Frum community from Viewmount, saying it's time for you to take responsibility for your brethren. It's up to you. And each of them is going to invite for Shabbos, and each of them is going to go for coffee, and each of them is going to learn. And we learn every 2-3 weeks we get together and we all learn as a group. But each of these people are developing deep relationships. I don't see any other way. Right? The idea is that the community is makarev. It's not. I think that in today's day, it's no longer on the Reb Noach Weinbergs and no longer on the individuals. It's really just on the entire community. It's our achrayas, and I believe that to some degree that's really where things have changed. Is that it's on the klal. It's really on the klal. I'm going to stop there, and if there's any other questions afterwards, I will.
Thank you.
Okay, I think the question, the way I understood the question from my vantage point, from an adolescent perspective, kids, they learn their identity between the ages of 14 and 25. So during that time, a tremendous amount of stuff is going on in the adolescent mind. And that's really the most, as the rabbi actually said, it's a great opportunity to really influence, a positive influence in these kids' lives. Rabbi Sittner said that he was, 30 years ago was 2, so 30 years ago I was a teenager, but just a little before that, the intermarriage rate in 1971 or so was 17% in North America. Today, you could inverse those two numbers. The number today is 71%. If you want to know what's happened in the Jewish world in the last 30 years, that's really, you can put your finger right there. There is a tremendous amount of intermarriage and assimilation. The assimilation number, by the way, is radically greater than the intermarriage rate because some people, by accident, marry Jews. And I've had that situation many, many times, people dating Jews, but they don't really deal with that subject until the 10th date or the 3rd month or something like that because it's just not relevant at all. To me, that is the greatest threat facing the Klal Yisrael. And it's true, maybe we can't stop the wave that is happening, but in our view, in my view, there are individuals in every single community that can be helped and can be engaged and whose lives can be radically changed. And if there's a branch that is broken from a tree and they leave, there's other branches on that tree that could be replanted and other beautiful blossoms will come from that. Another great, great change that is happening is that this generation has, again, I'm talking about adolescents mostly, have no sense of history and they do not appreciate where we have come as a nation. Moshe Poser and I went on the March of Living 5 times. And we have seen in a 15 or 20-year period this total disregard. And it's not just on the March of Living. I'm not trying to say that trip has no value, and it has tremendous value, but we have seen the Yerida, a dropping down of the generations of the kids who, once you went in the late 1990s or mid-1990s, had a sense of where they were standing in the Yeshiva Chochmei Lublin or in Auschwitz. There was a reality to this place. And today, you use the word Holocaust in a conversation with a kid, there is a total turnoff. We joke around in NCSY when we're trying to do some emotional. We say, give me more Holocaust, give me more Holocaust. Because the kids are totally disconnected. It's not happening. And Israel is the other place that kids have no sense of. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, there was still a battle for the land. There was a sense of, I can do something to make that place great. Today, Baruch Hashem, Eretz Yisrael is very strong. But it is also the least likely place for a Jewish family to go on vacation. And it is the least likely place where a kid will choose to go after high school. And the battle between Costa Rica and Israel today is very, very real. And it's not something to be, and that's, by the way, coming from, of course, the family. And that's the other thing that I think is dramatic, and that's a major change, and that is parents. Parents today are very focused. You said wisdom and wealth. Well, that doesn't just come, kids don't just fall off that tree. They come from somewhere, and that identity that is formed with the kids is definitely coming from the parents, where they feel that absolutely money, grades, success in university leads to a better life. That is all there is. There is no everything else. Every single thing that is not that is a distraction. And Yiddishkeit and Eretz Yisrael and mitzvahs and a Shabbaton and a lecture, it's a distraction to homework and to success in life, because that's how it's defined. We had an event here. I'll close with this. I think you want probably some questions. But we had an event actually in this room about 5 or 6 years ago where we had Gila Mandelson. We brought her in from Eretz Yisrael. She reads books on Shomer Negiah and different things. So she traveling through North America. We brought her here for a Shabbaton. She spoke in this room. There were about 50 or 60 kids. And she talked about, I'm not even sure how she got to this topic, but she started talking about interdating. And she asked how many people in this room would interdate. Now, these are kids that are part of NCSY already, part of Torah High, actually. that means they've had already some identity in their world. We don't get everybody, but we got a lot of them, but these kids already are in. So she asked, how many people here would interdate? And almost every single hand went up. So I couldn't believe what I saw. So I stopped the program, and I went to the front of the room, and I asked everybody to close their eyes so they wouldn't look at each other and get any pressure. And I asked, how many of your parents care that you interdate? Of the 50 kids, how many people do you think raised their hands that their parents care that they interdate? 2. Now, I was so shocked that I went afterwards to one of the ladies, one of the girls, high school girl, and I said, are you telling me your parents don't care if you interdate? She says, no, my mother actually does care if I interdate. I said, wow, that's unbelievable. Why didn't you say something? She says, because my mother's Catholic, and she really thought it was very difficult, and I didn't want to bring that up in the topic of all my friends, so I didn't say anything. This happened here in the BAYT, in an NCSY program, just a few years ago. Parents are totally disengaged in their kids' lives. It is about technology. We could talk more about technology. We could talk more about how people are distracted and how families are distracted, how kids are distracted. But to me, these are an overarching major shifts that are going on in the world today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all three of you, for these very important perspectives. We're going to open up the floor in just a minute. I'd like to ask all three of you to comment on two things that I think Rabbi Karlinsky alluded to. Number one, truthfulness in outreach, truthfulness in Kiruv, which means that is there any time when the ends justify the means, where as a way of bringing someone into Yiddishkeit, we can package the message of Torah in a way that would be perceived by some to be somewhat deceptive. One of the issues that's been raised over the years, one of the very, very effective Kiruv methods that was used, I know, in years past was the Bible codes. And now that Bible codes are not, have been mathematically at least argued, it's been argued mathematically that you could get the same results from the entire works of Shakespeare that you get in the Tanakh. Some have questioned whether this is an authentic way of demonstrating the divinity of Torah. And perhaps there are other kinds of perhaps pseudo-intellectualism that is argued by people who perhaps do not have a PhD in philosophy and use certain persuasive arguments where afterwards, like Rabbi Karlinsky talked about, the angry ex-Baal Tshuva. So if you could comment on that and present your view on presenting arguments that perhaps you realize that there may not be total authenticity or total proof to the arguments that you make, but could you defend those kinds of discussions and conversations that you have with prospective Baalei Tshuva? And then the second issue that Rabbi Karlinsky alluded to that I'd like you to address is, what is the end game of Kiruv for you today? Rabbi Karlinsky mentioned, and at least this is certainly the way that I was brought into the Kiruv world, is that you're a successful Kiruv, or you're a successful Mekarev if you make someone Shomer Shabbos. If you don't make someone Shomer Shabbos, you're a failure. And I do think that is the benchmark philosophically for some outreach professionals, versus what I like to affectionately call the Chabad Kiruv philosophy, which is just having someone put on a pair of tefillin that's never put on a pair of tefillin in their life is a mark of success. And even if that person does not become Shomer Shabbos, you have fulfilled a tafkid as a mekarev, because each person ba'asher husham, each person in whatever station that they are in life, just bringing them one mitzvah closer is in itself a success. And if you could address that issue, you can choose either issue or both. And if you could just explain how those two things affect the way that you go about doing your professional business in the outreach world. Thank you.
So, in regards to using intellectual arguments, I'll tell you my personal opinion is, first of all, I don't know what the Bible codes are. I never study them, but and I know maybe that's strange because I think the Bible codes originated with Esha Torah, didn't they?
No,
No?
Esha Torah adopted them.
Oh, Arachim. Okay. In any case, I've never seen them, but in my opinion. Will I philosophically, engage people and go back and forth in regards to the proof of Judaism versus other religions? Is there a God? Is there a God? Of course, 100%. And particularly when it comes to the validity of our religion, I'll definitely go through all the things that are proofs and only things that make sense to me. If something is not rooted in something real and doesn't truly speak to me, so I won't say it. But even that, can everybody hear me without the mic? Can you hear me without the mic? Perfect. Even is that okay if I don't use it?
Just keep it close.
Okay. Yeah, they're echoing. I hear the echo also. So, in addition to using all these arguments, I tell people that in the end of the day, be it a scientific proof or some other rational approach to the validity of Judaism, in the end of the day, for me, number one, there's an internal belief. Number two, we have a Masorah. And so even if any of the proofs or any of the scientific rationale, et cetera, to the validity of Judaism is ever disproved, it will make zero difference to my Judaism. It'll make zero difference to my kids' Judaism and to my grandkids' Judaism. Because in the end of the day, I tell people it's a Masorah. And I explain what that means, a Masorah, and I explain what that means, a Pesach Seder, and I explain why Yitzias Mitzrayim was such an integral part of our Yiddishkeit. This, for me, that's what it's about. Because going through all the scientific proofs in the end of the day, or going through all the rational evidence, etc., it's wonderful, and a lot of them are really strong arguments, and I do present them. But I tell people, in the end of the day, it comes down to Masorah for a Jew. And that's my personal belief. So I will never use something that I don't feel is real.
If I may just interject, that's the big divide between Maimonides and Rabbi Yehuda Halevi as to what is the source of our belief. For the Kuzari, it's Masorah, and for the Rambam, it's intellect. So
right.
I appreciate very much what you said.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. And do you want me to address the other question or pass
please,
on?
Please.
Okay. And remind me, what was the other question?
Are you
when you get to my age, you forget things.
Is it all or nothing, or is it incremental?
Oh, so is it all or nothing incremental? So in terms of all or nothing, I'd like to not think that it's all or nothing for many reasons. And I don't believe it's all or nothing. I also don't believe that if I put tefillin on somebody or give somebody kashrus, that's the goal either. In other words, I don't believe that it's either keeping Shabbos or not, and I also don't think that it's get them to light menorah once and that's it. I think the middle ground is when they choose to put on tefillin or when they choose to light the menorah, they choose to keep kashrus. The middle ground being, it's not necessarily me who is involved in their shmiras and mitzvahs, but them who has chosen to take a step to grow in some area of their Judaism. For me, I believe that's really where it's at. Obviously, the goal is we hope the Shabbos, Kashrus, Taras HaMashpacha. We hope all the major parts of Judaism are going to be. They will adapt all of it, but I believe that today in Kiruv, if that's the goal, so then we set ourselves up for failure. Not if it's the goal, I'm sorry. If we see that as all or nothing, we'll set ourselves up for failure. Every mitzvah that a yid does is crucial. So that's my
Maybe I'll start with the second part because after listening to that, I am sure I have a lot of confidence that Rabbi Sittner will have no angry ex-Balei Tshuva. That's exactly the way it needs to be done, step by step, and whatever they take on, they decided. And if it doesn't work, it was their decision. This has always been a big issue in Kiruv. This is one of the things that has not changed in 40 years. What's the end game supposed to look like? What's the goal? We have Torah, and the goal of a Jew is to be a Torah-observant Jew. And therefore, to say that we're going to set up a program where the entire goal of that program is simply to stop intermarriage, for example, that is, in my opinion, not based on sources. It's also a losing game, because if you take two people who are candidates for intermarriage, and through focusing simply on Jewish pride and Jewish continuity, without a Torah and without HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the equation, then what you just did is you pushed the problem down one generation and increased it by 50%, because you took two people who are candidates for intermarriage, you got them to marry Jewish, they will have 3 Jewish children, all of whom will be candidates for intermarriage. So we certainly have to be focused on Torah and Torah observance. That has to be the ideal goal. But we also have to remember a very interesting Maimer Chazal that's usually misunderstood. Rotza HaKadosh Baruch Hu lezakos es Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to give merit to the Jewish people. Lefikach hirba lahem Torah u'mitzvos. So he gave us lots of mitzvos. And the Rishonim ask a very simple question. If there's 613, I'm much more likely to fail than if there would only be 7. 7 is easy. 613, that's overwhelming. I'm almost for sure going to fail. So how is that called Ratzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu lezakos says Yisrael? If you want to be mezakim, you want to make me succeed, you're rooting for my success, make it easy. So the Mefarshim say the opposite, is that since there are 613, every Jew is going to keep some mitzvos. And as long as we have a connection between Jews, and here's where the concept of Jewish unity and achdus comes in, arvus, if we're connected as Jewish people and we're doing mitzvos connected, everybody messes up. Nobody keeps all the mitzvos. All right? So we have to realize that if I can get a Jew to keep mitzvos, even if it's some of the mitzvos, that's valuable. But to say my goal is a narrow goal and that's success, no. The goal has to be mitzvah observance. That's the goal. It's a step-by-step process, and there's nobody succeeds. But to artificially just manipulate somebody into putting on tefillin or getting him to keep one Shabbos that has no continuity, I'm not sure what the long-term value is from a hashkafic perspective. To go back to the first question, I'm going to say this very sharply, and it's painful that after 40 years, this is still an issue. You cannot sell emes with sheker. You don't sell Torah, chosamo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu emes. God's Torah is emes, and we are only allowed to teach and present the truth of the Torah. And if the only way I can convince somebody to adopt mitzvah observance is by misrepresenting the Torah, then I have no right to do that, and there are certain sources that even have that bordering on one of the most serious crimes. I am misrepresenting the Torah. I'm not allowed to do that. I always say, if I present Torah authentically, and the Jew I'm presenting it to doesn't buy it, I can turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu after 120 years and say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I taught your Torah. They didn't buy it. But if I try to create all kinds of sales pitches and they don't buy it, then I'm responsible. Because then I made up something. And of course, then there's the pragmatic issue of down the road, a person may find out that you misrepresented. But all the poskim, and this is a shaila that has come up many times over the years at AJOP conventions, and pre that, in Yerushalayim, we went to Reb Shlomo, many people went to Reb Shlomo Zalman about some very, very specific shailas where it was made crystal clear. If it's not emes, you're not allowed to present that as an argument for Torah. Okay, and again, philosophical arguments are a little more gray because philosophy itself, we can argue this way, we can argue that way, you can convince somebody. But once we get into the scientific stuff and the mathematical stuff, so anything that's a misrepresentation, so it's prohibited, absolutely prohibited to do that, even if it's going to work.
Thank you. Rabbi Block?
You want to share it? Yeah? Yeah, I'm happy to comment. I just don't know if you move on. The good news is that high school kids don't think at all. So, so this issue really of like the intellectual and MS and sheker, it doesn't come up at all. they live in the world of Facebook, which is the sheker, so you don't have to do much to show them emes. And that's a reality today, unfortunately. I've actually never encountered deceptive Kiruv practices. I've never met people who've done that. I don't know what it really means. I do want to just say, Rabbi Korobkin, you talked about discovery or arachim. In my youth, when I was just starting university, I wouldn't say a crisis of faith, but we were a modern Orthodox young boy trying to figure out what is MS and what's not MS, and somebody introduced me to the codes in the Torah, and that sparked in me a tremendous passion. I would say that if it wasn't for those classes and some shiurim that actually, when I was in Yeshiva University, some people came there to give classes on this particular thing, I probably would not be in the role that I'm in. And that also would mean that everything we've accomplished in the last 20 years in NCSY in Canada probably would not have happened to the same extent without the sheker of this discovery. So the point I'm making is that even if it was proven to be not true, to me that was my gateway in, and then the rest of my life we continue learning and growing and trying to be as sincere in my Yiddishkeit as possible.
So does that mean that the ends do justify the means sometimes?
I hope that no one was trying to pull the wool over my eyes. I think people who were doing it were sincere about it. If it was proven later on that it was not true, I don't know about that, but I would never. Let me give you another example. If we say the ends justify the means, sometimes in NCSY we will send a kid to yeshiva, to seminary or Israel, even if we know they're not really ready. Now, I'm not sure if that qualifies as the ends justify the means, because we know the alternative is a disaster. The alternative is they're going to go to some secular university and they're going to get caught up in BDS and they're going to perhaps interdate, and it's terrible. So at least they're going to go to some seminary who we probably should not send them there because they're not really so engaged in Limud Torah and they don't want to grow and they're not wearing a skirt yet. But the alternative is so much worse. We don't twist our arms. We could tell them that this is a good thing, and many of them go. And sometimes it's a win, and sometimes it's not a win.
In other words, you're saying you were brought into an embracing environment, which was in some way stimulating to you both emotionally and intellectually, and that's what brought you in. So it's less important what the particular arguments were, even if they're later proven to be incorrect. Just like the analogy that you're making with the young man or woman that you send off to that
potentially
wholesome, protective environment. Is that?
Yeah.
That's the point that you're making. Okay.
Can I comment one thing on that?
Please.
Okay. Having seen the results of people who are sent to yeshiva prematurely, I think that the solution is to set up programs that are appropriate for the people that you're talking about, so that on the one hand they don't have to go to a secular university to be caught up in the BDS before they're equipped, but on the other hand I think that part of the long-term failures are people who are sent prematurely to yeshiva. And it hit me a number of years ago when I was recruiting for our yeshiva, and I meet somebody at a campus that happened to be in England, and he had done an Israel trip, and he was connected with the rabbi on the campus, and I think I feel you're ready to come to yeshiva. Why don't you come and spend the summer learning with us? And he said, no, I did yeshiva already. I spent a week after my Israel trip in yeshiva. He felt he had paid his dues. He did yeshiva. And another person said, yeah, I tried yeshiva. It didn't work for me. That was early in his process, and that experience could have turned him off. So I understand the problem of what's the alternative. Okay, and this may be, it's choose your poison. But so I think what needs to happen, and I believe that NCSY is doing it, is trying to develop programs that are not such intense yeshiva programs that the kids may get overwhelmed, but on the other hand, it's an appropriate light entry into the world of Torah that they can handle before they go to university. And I think that's imperative. We're talking about agendas in Kiruv. That certainly has to be a top priority.
Okay, just one last question, and then we're going to open up the floor. I just wanted to ask for each of you, perhaps, and this is perhaps even more important for Rabbi Black and Rabbi Sittner. Rabbi Sittner had alluded to the fact that the role of Jewish outreach or Kiruv is really incumbent upon the Jewish community. It's not on the professional mikarev. It's really a communal effort. one of the things that I sort of sometimes do thought experiments, which causes me lots of consternation, is that I wonder if I was a complete stranger to traditional Judaism and I walked into the BAYT or into the View Mount or into the village shul for the first time in my life, would my initial encounter be a positive one? Would it be a negative one? I mean, would it be the guy who comes, I'm talking at Kiddush and he's got the egg salad flying out of his mouth? And would that be the first encounter? Would it be an encounter of coldness or too large or too unfriendly? In other words, I guess the question that I'm raising are our communities sufficiently fortified with emotionally and intellectually healthy individuals who love their Judaism, who love Torah, and are those the people that our community is putting forward? And have we done our job to truly embrace those who are unaffiliated when they walk into our institutions? If you can reflect on that, please.
I love this shul, and I love the people in this shul, and I come here every single day of my life, and I come here almost every Shabbos if I'm in town. But I have exactly that fear, because you know that a few times a year we bring outsiders into this building, and my heart stops always. In fact, the Shabbos before a Friday night dinner last year, I know Rabbi Sisson is going to talk about, he has greeters in his shul. Greeters. So let me tell you how I was greeted into the shul, and I live here. As soon as I walked through the door, did I tell you this, Rabbi Spitz? I think I walked through the door and somebody said, shh. So I was thinking, if somebody who doesn't appreciate what is happening in that room walks in and somebody greets them with the word or this, shh, I cannot believe there would be a second coming, so to speak. And I think the problem is that we've become, and I don't know how this is possible. I'm still young. I'm still learning. In my own estimation, the BAYT is, it's the greatest. It's the greatest lighthouse of inspiration and potential in this entire community, and it's made up of at least 50% of the people who come to daven here. At least 50% are Baalei Tshuva. They themselves or their parents are connected to that movement in some way. And maybe that number, so many people told me, is even higher. How there's a disconnect between how they understood their Yiddishkeit and today how they connect with those who are coming closer. I don't understand I don't understand it. I'm not sure what's happening. And I think that's a major issue. There's a young lady on one point in the names, but we brought a group of people here for the Shabbos project 2 years ago. Rabbi Spitz worked very, very hard on this, and we brought a lot of people from the community into the building, and we offered the greatest thing you can do in Jewish outreach is serve refreshments, and we did that, and it was a disaster. It was a disaster not because the speakers weren't great or God Elbaz sang. It was a disaster because people were literally elbowing themselves for tuna wraps, and it was terrifying. It was scary and it was embarrassing, and whatever effort guys like us try to do to bring people into the Orthodox world, because frankly, we need the BAYT. We need this place to function. We need a community for many of our families to join, but somehow the message is lost among our community of what it means to be a role model and an inspirational personality, and that if you see somebody you don't recognize, welcome them in, and maybe offer them the tuna wrap as opposed to grabbing it on your plate.
And is that perhaps the problem, is that people don't view their role here in the shul as, basically, I come here after a long week, I'm interested in davening and doing what's good for me. It's not my job as a member of this congregation to help other people find their way.
Could be.
And so what's the pitaron, Rabbi Black? Like, what's the solution? Okay, we'll open up the floor. Rabbi.
They have some solutions.
We just heard that you have leaders. Please help us bring the shul back to a higher place.
So yes, it happens to be. We do have greeters, and basically our entire shul is made up of Balei Tshuva. I mean, people who are either Balei Tshuva or are just not observant. That's the makeup. I don't want to say which percentage is higher on a Shabbos, but that is the makeup of our shul. And I think that the atmosphere, it could be perhaps if you have a homogeneous community of Balei Tshuva, where you don't really have so many people who are not observant that are around, then the feeling or that sensitivity towards those that aren't observant perhaps is lost. But when there are so many people that are not observant, that are walking in for the first time, people that are not Jewish that are coming on a Shabbos morning, and the feeling, the atmosphere in the air really is one of, we have to be sensitive. So that's just the prevalent. It's really just the prevalent influence in the shul. So yeah, I mean, it happens to be certain things. I think there are tweaks that one can do. We have a greeter at the front door and a greeter handing out the flyers and saying good Shabbos to everybody. And then when you walk into the shul, we have a greeter standing at the door who gives you a sitter and shows you where to sit. In fact, there was a story that just 3 weeks ago, a couple sitting at my table, husband and wife, and the husband was in a process of converting, and basically his wife says to him, you can go to the village shul. She's like, I don't go there. I'm not so observant either, but you can go there. Anyway, he goes. 13 years ago, they walk in, and he was in the process already. He opens up the doors to the main sanctuary, and he sees all these guys with taluses and sitters, and he basically says at that moment, this is not for me. He said he froze. This is at my Shabbos table. He's telling the story. He said he just froze, and he said, it's over. And he said somebody walked up to him, or just a regular guy in the shul, just someone with a big heart, walked up to him, took him by the hand, didn't say anything, just took him by the hand, pointed to an empty seat, gave him a sitter, opened up the page, showed him the page, and then after davening, when davening was over, brought him down to the kiddush. They had a l'chaim together, and he told me who that person's name was, and he said he hasn't ever seen him since, but at that moment was this switch to get back on track, and the couple sitting there married, and it was just an amazing thing that something so small can make such a big difference. But I think that one thing that I am seeing, because I don't think you could use the village shul as an example for most shuls. Like I said, the prevalent atmosphere it's a very diverse place. Most people are not from there on a Shabbos morning. So, or I don't want to say most, but there's definitely a strong percentage of people that are not observant. So the feeling is in the air. But what about when you're in a community where it's not necessarily in the air? So one thing that I found, and this is something that I mentioned before, and we're doing it in different venues, different types of programs, is this shidduch that we're doing with the View Mound Shul, where we have taken in a very small sort of sample size a population of regular FFB or FFB guys, and we paired them up with guys from our shul who aren't observant. What's being created is this sensitivity. And if I could describe the atmosphere about a month ago when we sat together, after learning for several months together as a group, we sat together on a Friday night in the View Mount Base Medrash, after each of us being hosted in their homes. We all came together, and I said, we're all going to go around, and everyone's going to share what this experience has been like. And the Frum guys are sitting there like, what is this, an AA meeting? Like, they were like so uncomfortable. Anyone that's like from a not from background, they're used to it. You go around a Shabbos table, and everybody shares their experience. But they were like, no, you're not really going to do this. I said, yeah, we're really going to do this. And they didn't want to start. One guy volunteered so fast just because he wanted to get it over with. But when we went around, of course, from the people that weren't observant, they were saying, how blown away they were by their chavrusa and by the family and how their wives were connected, etc. But then to hear the guys from the View Mount Shul say how, when I first came into this, I was skeptical, and I didn't know what to make of it, and I was scared. They asked questions, and the sensitivity clearly did not exist months before, and they're in a completely different mind space, completely different headspace. They are. Things have changed dramatically, and now I feel like I have an additional 20 Makarvim in the community who have the sensitivity. So it's really an amazing thing. I mean, that's just something I've seen.
I'm really blown away by that story, and I think that having been, when you're 40 years in the business, you can get fossilized and not be in touch with what's going on, and that's amazing. What I just heard, definitely the community responsibility is very great. I must confess, I was totally depressed to hear Rabbi Black's little story. Unfortunately, it just reminded me of things I hear from our students. One of the things I like to tell people who are in the business is we are a laboratory. Chappelle's and Midrash Rachel is a laboratory for your success, because when they get to us, it means you were successful. But it's very important to hear their stories and find out what worked along the way. Why did they end up in the end game of studying in yeshiva and seminary? And what were some of the things that might have gotten them in the other direction? And definitely one of the biggest problems that we always hear is walking into an Orthodox shul. That is not a positive experience. There is a joke. I mean, a lot of Baal Tshuva jokes. One of the jokes going around, and I'm going to use it because it's something that the community has to be aware of. How do you know you're not a Baal Tshuva anymore? When they're talking in shul and it doesn't bother you. And how do you know you're really a part of the Orthodox community? When you join the conversation. Baalei Tshuva look at this and say, wait a minute, this isn't what we thought it's supposed to be like. And it's a huge responsibility on the members of the Orthodox community to be role models. That was the idea of role models, and this is, again, maybe Project Inspire needs to be focusing on this also, is not just in the workplace, but in the shuls. They're walking in, people are not observing. I have been in the village shul many times, and it's absolutely a very, very different experience than everywhere else, and I can see how that could happen. And it's a lack of sensitivity, and maybe here's another aspect that the Orthodox community has to be aware of when we talk about whether, the future of Kiruv, should we redirect our priorities. Kiruv is important to the Orthodox community because it manifests a caring for other Jews. And too much of our Orthodox world is very focused and self-centered on our orthodoxy and on our way and on our things and on our agenda. And we've got to realize that we have responsibilities outside of our Dalet Amot. And one of those responsibilities is to be role models for people who are coming into the shuls. It's a little amazing that a shul that has Baalei Tshuva or children of Baalei Tshuva lost that sensitivity. But again, it's really a problem not with the Kiruv world, it's a problem with the Orthodox world. And one of the things that came out on Friday night is that there was a big mix of problems that Baalei Tshuva have down the road, where some of the problems are endemic to Baalei Tshuva, but many of the problems are endemic to the Orthodox world. And you join the Orthodox world, and you now become involved in some of these problems. So it's an interface here now between the Kiruv world and the Orthodox world, where the Orthodox world has to take responsibility and realize they are role models for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah. They are role models for Sheyehei Shem Shamayim Mitahiv Al Yodcha. So I just want to strengthen very much the issue that's being raised, and I know Rabbi Korobkin is sensitive to it, and I'm sure that it's a big challenge.
Okay, let's open up the floor. Yes, ma'am.
So I just wanted to comment. It was said, you mentioned it. I would say a number of years ago, when I was, starting my Jewish journey, I was asked the question by someone, "Are you still doing your Jewish thing?" And I said yes. And they said to me, "Are you going to become one of those outreach Jews, or are you just going to be like my son, who just became religious for himself and doesn't do the outreach?" It was asked to me, and I looked at the person and I said, I'm just, at that point, I didn't even really know what that meant, although I did a little, but I just said, I'm just doing my thing. But it was, and this is a non-observant person, a parent of a Baalei Tshuva. But that idea of, are you going to be that type of Jew, or just for yourself, you're doing this just for yourself, is very common. And I was trying to understand it, because I belong to Aisha Torah, that's our shul, and it's really hammered into us. I was trying to understand, where does this sense of responsibility that I have, where did it come from? As I'm learning, and I have this tremendous responsibility for other Jews. Did that come about just through my own, or has it been sort of hammered into me as I'm growing Jewishly that, okay, I have to worry about myself, but certainly I can't just leave and go, we have many of our people who've been makar through Aisha Torah, and it's talked about within my shul, within my community, that people are brought closer through Aish, and then they leave. and they leave our shul, they go to other shuls, and they don't necessarily
continue along that trajectory that was inculcated.
Of caring of other
caring
Jews
for Asia.
and sticking around.
Yeah, it's a very important point. And it's, again, I think that we're touching on a very, very important point here, which is that there are some Orthodox Jews for whom the idea that I have a responsibility to a Jew who I've never met, who is unaffiliated, who has nothing to do with my community, that does not resonate with them. And perhaps what was inculcated into you when you came into this world through Aish is just the opposite, that just as someone cared enough to bring you in, you have that same responsibility to others. We'll go, yes, Jack.
Yeah, so just very quickly, I'm a little protective of BAYT, I admit, but the answer to the question about when you walk into the BAYT and if you've been there for the first time and you don't have a background and you're just learning, what kind of reception would you get? Well, I just want to make one quick point, then I'll ask my question. I think it depends where you sit. It really does. I think if you in certain circles, you get hammered with half a dozen people come up to you, Shalom Aleichem, hi, how are you? Are you visiting? What are you doing? And I've had my own experience in terms of my area where I said we have a handful of guys that are just really good at it. And so again, I think it depends. If you sit in the back and you sort of like give off some body language that you want to be left alone, you will be left alone. But if you look like you are interested, I can tell you that you will find people coming over to you and trying to make you feel comfortable. I hope so, because I've always thought that was part of the beauty of this beautiful building. I wanted to come back to a little bit of a subject that I think we've all been talking about, and that's this idea of sort of established from community, the older established from community here, the heartland of from community here, particularly in Toronto, and I think it's not much different than other big communities. Rabbi remembers, I think it was 2 winters ago, we had the pleasure of hosting Rabbi Lau for a Shabbos here. And it was a very, Rabbi Strollmayer Lau, who was the former chief rabbi of Israel, now the current chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. And it was a very moving for all of us. I think it was a historical moment in the Bible. It was a tremendous Shabbaton for all of us. He's very enjoyable. He's an incredible personality. On Saturday night, on Motzei Shabbos, the Vat HaRavonim, all of the mainstream Orthodox rabbis gathered to have a reception for him. And of course, there was I happened to have driven and dropped him off over there, and I walked into the room just to say hello to the host. And anyway, he came in, and every Rav of the city was there, from all the big shuls, Haredi shuls, Hasidic shuls, and it was quite a nice cover that they gave him. And they after it was over, he came back to our home and where he was staying, and he seemed very disturbed. And I asked him what was found disturbing. So he said to me that the focus of when they turned to the Rabbanim, they wanted to ask questions. They asked him 2 questions. They asked him one question was, they wanted to know about what should they tell their mispalim about the Aguda issue, about this idea of men withholding divorces from women, which is a horrible, horrible subject. And the other issue that he wanted to, which he had a view of, that the Aguda issue was really in North America more of a financial issue where unfortunately men hold women ransom to giving a get. It's a horrible thing. And in Israel it doesn't seem to exist that much. Number 2, they wanted to know particularly because that was a time when they were starting to introduce legislation about drafting Haredim into the army. And the Rabbanim there wanted to know what they should be telling their congregants about this issue. And he said, I was shocked. He said, what I responded to them is, why is that a subject that you're dealing with here in Canada? It's an Israeli problem. It's my problem. It's a problem for me, for my grandson, whether he's going to go into the army, how he's going to go into the army. It's a subject that we Israelis are dealing with. And he said, we're going to deal with it. We're going to solve the problem. But why are you concerned about it here? And then he turns to them and he says, I want to talk about something else. And this is the focus of my question. I hate to take too much time. He says, the focus of my question is, what are you all doing about the Pew Report? What are you all doing about the crisis, a huge crisis, which we don't have in our world, thank God, about the rate of intermarriage, 55, 60, 65%. It's a crisis. Why are you not spending sleepless nights and making that the #1 priority in your kehillas? So he got sort of a bit of a lukewarm kind of response. And he said to me that, they all were a little bit embarrassed about the question. And basically he said, well, we have programs here. We have NCSY, and we have Or Sameach, and we have Aisha Torah, and we have project this and project that. We don't really deal with that kind of stuff. My question is, why don't we? Why don't we do it like in a more, and I think, the buck stops at the top. Like in business, whether you're in government or in business, whether you're the rabbi, the buck starts at the top. Why are not, and this is not a criticism of Korobkin, why are not the mainstream rabbinical figures in the city dealing with this on a major, major basis? And I don't know, what is it about it that I think some people feel uncomfortable about it? One person once said to me, BAYT will always make us feel uncomfortable because they remind us what we should be doing. Like Rabbi Kalinsky says, I think you said that, they remind us we shouldn't be talking in shul, that we should really be happening, and we should make a go bracha on everything that we do. I don't say it out loud, so somebody can say, doing all the things that we should normally be doing, that we just sort of like it by rote. So I just have a question. What is it, do you think, that, it's pretty obvious. It's like so major to us today. It's almost like the Holocaust. I hate to use that word, but it's almost on proportions of what we were experiencing during World War II. And a huge danger that we're facing. Huge millions and millions of Jews that we're losing here in North America and maybe other parts of the world.
Okay, Yishar Koach. Thank you. Rabbis? Anyone want to respond?
I'll just begin by saying thank you for that. Thank you for what you do for the Kiruv movement. I think that speaks highly of your passion for it. The core family today, the family itself, is at risk by itself. Children, frum kids in yeshivas today, know the same music as a kid in public school, watch the same movies, mostly dressed in the same way, and the risk of a child going off by being more influenced by other people in their sviva, in their milieu, could be catastrophic to a family. I think on a certain level, that's why most people don't engage in this, because they feel that if they are too involved, it will or plant a seed of poison in their families. How can you have somebody dressed like that in your home? How can you somebody who's going to pick up a cell phone on a Shabbos or on a Yontif? How can you have somebody drive into your house on a Shabbos? So these things protect the core family. It happens to be, in my view, that you're not going to be a protected core family unless your kid is exposed to these kind of things. Because in my feeling, and thank God in our home, we've had literally thousands and thousands of people come through the door. And what our message to our children and those who do Kiruv is, look what you have as a gift. Look what you're able to provide to others. And they get a tremendous sipuk in that. They get a tremendous pride in knowing that others are coming to our home to learn what it means to be a Jew. I think most people fear that. I think most people are worried about that. And I think the core family, the Orthodox community, is at risk by itself. And therefore, I got to worry about my family, my community, and the world around me will take care of itself. I think that's part of why people are not getting engaged in this as much as they should.
First of all, I share your passion, and I also have to say that I feel that you are talking to me, even though you're not. I know that you're not, but I feel that you are, because I feel the burden of not having done enough. And that's part of the reason why I do speak a lot about the importance of our community doing outreach, greeting every person, making sure that we bring those people in our home. I'm trying to think back. I grew up as a modern Orthodox Jew, in a very similar milieu as the BAYT community. And I know that my parents loved to entertain. They still do entertain. And it was a rarity for us to have someone who was becoming a Baal Tshuva or was a Baal Tshuva. Not that it was never done. Occasionally, if there was a single person and the shul asked us to have them over and so forth, we would. But my parents enjoyed entertaining their friends. And my parents enjoyed spending time with their friends where they could joke and they could speak about the latest book that they were reading and all of these other things. And I think that instead of framing it as some kind of insidious xenophobia, it's not so much that I don't think there's a conscious fear that people have of bringing these people into our home. For a lot of people, and maybe for some people that's the concern. But I just think for a lot of people, Shabbos is a time when I want to entertain like people. I want to entertain people that are like me. I want to have my friends over. We all have an aversion to welcoming strangers into our home because it's not as familiar, it's not as comfortable. And one of the things that I very strongly believe in, is that that's one of the nisyonos, that's one of our tests, is that how much are we going to love unconditionally our fellow Jew, even though they are different from us, even though we don't know them, even though it doesn't create the same flow of conversation. But that very much resonates, Jack, and halavai, we should continue to go in that direction. Jordan.
We've got some tremendous challenges already that we've laid out today. I'd like to throw two more onto the pile. And I think there are two groups that are even further outside of the orbit of the Kiruv approach, to a certain degree. And I think they're part of this Inoli de Lishol generation. There are those for whom I can say that they're mindless. That there aren't any questions. It's not even a question of making money or anything else. They're just drifting. They're just purely hedonistic, having a great time, have no intellectual concerns, issues, challenges, etc. And we have another group, maybe part of that subset, though, that find they are extremely idealistic in terms of social consciousness. They get involved with all of the tikkun olam kind of projects of the day, whether it's a Jewish one or whether it's a secular one, and they want to get in. For them, that is real. That is where they see the tremendous potential that perhaps that's their Pinteliyid in some way, sort of exercising itself. But are we able to harness these two groups? Do they need different approaches? Are they currently part of, are they in the orbit? Or are they completely outside of our thinking? And that's where I think that 71% are ultimately sitting and going to continue to be.
Please.
So I think that those two groups we need to identify. Maybe just one word. We have limited resources. That's a fact. Now we have to decide what is the most effective use of those limited resources. So I'm going to take the first group, and I'm going to preface my response with a joke. And if there's a certain population that will not laugh at this joke, and the joke is the definition of a consultant. The definition of a consultant is somebody who has solutions, and now he's running around your business looking to find problems. The consultants never laugh because they say, yeah, that's what we do. Why is that so funny? Okay? You have to know that I can only give a solution after I know the problem, and I can only give a solution to somebody who realizes he has a problem. So that first group has no problem. So if we're going to try to market Torah to them, we're coming to them with a solution, and they have no problem. That's why I think that the traction and the results on that are going to be very, very poor. I don't like to write off any Jew, and every Jew has a Pintel Yid, but as long as that's where they are, that we may have to find another way to ignite the Pintel Yid, but that's, I think, beyond the scope of what we're talking about in the group sitting here, as opposed to the second group. The second group, in my opinion, is a high-impact investment. They're there. They're just, all you need to do is take their idealism and show them that Torah is the actualization and manifestation of it in a real way. The problem is we've made Torah irrelevant. Okay, because the way Torah is being presented is not necessarily relevant. We're presenting it as ritual, as opposed to spirituality and ethics and transforming the human being into a godlike person. This really, folk, comes back to the idea of the midos. When the Rambam talks about tshuva from midos, what he's really talking about is changing the person into a higher level godlike person. Well, these guys sound like they're there already. So now it should be a relatively easy, certainly a high return on the investment to be focusing on them. So I think we have to make that distinction. And I think that here, again, I'm already, I say what I do in Jerusalem is already to try to solidify what the early stages are doing. But those early stages, I think the people involved in it have tremendous potential.
All right, I know we have a lot of people who would like to speak. Rabbi Karlinsky has to leave at 11 sharp. That doesn't mean that you all have to leave at 11. We can continue the conversation. Aharon Ariel Lavi was our guest. He's very much involved in Kiruv in Israel. And he's going to Limud today, so please.
I'd like to share a quick perspective from Israel. I would like to refer to what you said about this group that has no problem, and to other things you said about a society which is more self-centered, pursuing self-pleasures and all that. This is true that it has a very significant byproduct, which is loneliness. And when we have a society infected with loneliness, and we can offer some sort of a community and a place to be together, I think that's the key point. And that's authentic Judaism. It's not working out in a way which is not. I think, and in Israel we saw it succeeding very highly. Let's say yesterday that $200,000 tshuva, it's been very successful. But the problem is that we have not only many angry ex-Balei Tshuva, we have many angry Balei Tshuva. Still Balei Tshuva, maybe because they're Israelis tend to be more angry. But besides that, I think one of the key problems, and maybe you'll have some sort of advice from your perspective, is that there's a huge amount of resources invested in Israel in Kiruv. And I think in general, the Jewish world. But the problem is that professional Kiruv workers, once they get you to keep Shabbat or eat kosher or dress in a different way, and that's it. Mission accomplished, they move to the next person, and they, as far as they're concerned, they've done what they had to do. But only then the real challenges begin. That's for about Shuvah, that's when the problems start with how to educate my kids, how to get married if I'm not married yet, how to integrate my job with the new way of life. And many people either drop out, and that's the better case actually. And if they don't, they just stay angry, and then what we see in Israel very strongly is that their kids become dropouts already. So we have tens of thousands of youth who just drop out of schools. And we're trying to figure out a way how to convince the big institutions of Kiruv to invest a bit more in mentoring the Balei Tshuva after they become Balei Tshuva.
Maintenance.
And not maintenance, not only producing them, but also.
I'll just say one word on that, because I wrote this in an article more than 10 years ago, and that is that the priorities of funding are inverted, and my mantra, my formula was, we need to be spending $10 of follow-up for every dollar we spend on frontline. So and the formula, unfortunately, has been the opposite, and maybe not even that. They're spending huge amounts on frontline Kiruv, and then there's no money for the follow-up. And that leads to everything that you described, and it's unfortunately not just an Israeli problem. I'll say that it's very glitzy, it's very appealing with the frontline stuff. And the follow-up is very hard work, and it's a slow process, and the results are not quite as obvious. But that's critical. Otherwise, in the Gemara, the example we can use from Chazal, and they talk about it in Limud Torah, is there's Zoreya, there's Choresh, ve'eno Zoreya. A person can plow but not plant. He can be Zoreya, ve'eno Kotzer. He can plant and then not harvest. And if we're only focusing on front line, we're plowing and not planting, or we're planting and not harvesting. And therefore, definitely needs to be much, much more emphasis on the long-term follow-up.
In one sense, just with the numbers, the annual turnover of the whole Kiruv organization in Israel is about 200 million shekels a year. The organizations that deal with follow-up is about 7 million. That's the ratio between follow-up and frontline activity.
Chaim?
I wonder if I can ask a question with great respect to our rabbis. It's well known that in Asia Torah, Lakutei Moran, the master worker, Rabbi Natan, was not allowed to be on the shelf. It's well known. Rav Arush, who was in town yesterday, last week, and spoke to 1,000 people, and who has published well over 1 million copies of Garden of Emunah, is reaching out. There's no Kiruv crisis in Breslov and also Chabad and others, but I just know about Breslov. Can I ask a pointed question? I really mean no disrespect. The bias of rabbis coming out of the Litvish yeshivas who lack the basic knowledge of Torah's Nister and Chassidus, is that a barrier? Because clearly in the Hasidic world, who are people involved in Kiruv, do not have problems.
Excellent question. Let me just broaden the question. Are we biased against Hasidus, whether it's Breslov or Chabad, and do we view ourselves as a failure if one of our congregants or one of our Talmidim goes over to the Breslov or the Chabad side? If you could reflect on that.
If all my students became Hasidish, I would be so happy. You know what I mean? Like, first of all, I happen to be in an H building. We have Lakutei Moharan. We do have that on the shelves, and we have the Garden of Emunah books, and I teach Nesiva Shalom, which is Hasidish, and my grandparents were Hasidish, right? I happen to think that, I'm not sure exactly, I don't know, what the background of all the question is, where all these things are coming from, but I can just tell you, like, personally, I actually see that the at least the Kiruv approach that I have, and the Hasidish approach that I'm familiar with, I grew up with from my grandparents, to be completely in line. I don't really see a contradiction. There was Hasidus is all about the simcha. It's all about simcha in Yiddishkeit, and really seeing the beauty in it. This is what I teach. My shiurim on Shabbos are very often Nesiva Shalom, which is Shalom Chasidim. So I don't have that.
Anyone who's come to any of my drushes, who do I quote the most? Sifrei Hasidus. Okay, Rabbi Black, what do you say?
I think it goes back to the question, I guess, what do you consider success on a certain level? I have a mantra that says we give kids wings and we let them fly in any direction. We have kids who have become Chabad, and kids who have gone to the army, and kids who have become Hasidic. It makes no difference. We don't have this, I'm not sure what the barrier is, but I will tell you that Hasidic Torah is a fantastic entry point to speak to the heart. Now, I have another mantra, that first the stomach, then the heart, then the mind. First you feed people, and then you give them some emotion, and then you can talk intellectually. And I think the Hasidic Torah, the Breslev, Baal Tshuva, Baal Shem Tov, whatever that is, all of that Torah, if you don't have some of that, those vortlach, if you don't have that Torah, you really are not speaking to the neshama of that person.
I want to acknowledge, though, the point that you're making, Chaim. There is an extreme element within Breslov that some people find to be unsavory. The Nachman guys who are jumping up and down on the videos. And there's an extreme element in Chabad that some people find unsavory. The Messianic, the Meshichestim, right, that some people find. So perhaps there are in certain people's minds. I know that when I was in yeshiva 40 years ago, the Rashi, not 35, 30-something years ago, the Rashi yeshiva did disparage, whether overtly or covertly, there was a disparagement of either Chabad or Breslov and so forth, which left a certain aftertaste in our thoughts that I had to work very hard to counteract. I think maybe perhaps it still exists within some people's minds, but I think that most people who are in the Kiruv business today realize the beauty of Chassidus and its effectiveness. And that's why you'll find Rabbi Sittner saying, well, of course we have Garden of Emunah. And of course, I used to teach the Sichos of Lubavitcher Rebbe. So these are things that truly open-minded people that have a greater chance of success in outreach are going to be open-minded and are going to embrace Breslov and Chabad and all of the other strands of Judaism that have that appeal. People who are closed-minded will generally not, but they probably won't be that effective in Kiruv in the first place. Okay. Stan.
I just wanted to say something. I usually don't talk, but I've been here since the beginning of the BAYT, okay? And I've actually been through all the movements in the BAYT. And I want to tell you from my perspective what the success is. Then I have a question, because you finally asked the question that I wanted to ask. It's something called customer retention. We don't really take a business approach to keeping people here. We need customer retention. How do we keep them coming? And what happens to these poor guys who were former BAYT, who was talking about angry ones? I didn't even know that existed. I knew for sure there's lots, because I know lots who are former. But what worked for me and some of the people here was small groups. One of the attractions of the BAYT was the giant BAYT and Harusa and everybody together. But how do you work together is only in small groups. So small minions are not antithesis of an organization. 12 minions is a positive thing, if it's as long as we come back together. But how do we keep those people together? And that only worked, what I can tell you from a success point of view, from when Or Samantha existed. Money was the reason to collapse completely, was the Kfutza, the small groups. When people had 20, 30 people in their backyard for shalshudas at their house, and those strangers became their best friends. That's exactly what happened. So that one single stranger, that's the person that people invited back into their house afterwards. So it wasn't so weird and crazy guy that you got off the street or whatever. Although I saw that and I've seen sex stories that way. That's what we're doing now with the former BAYT, the old customer, the customer that has all the information that everybody invested all the money in and everything and just floats away. Are we doing? Is there any movement to bring those people back in? That's it.
Anyone? When Rabbi Sittner, when your BAYT at the village will graduate, where do they go?
It's a good question. I was told that prior to my arrival, there were, the lab, in I guess the last 10, 15 years, there were approximately 40 families that became observant and integrated into different parts of the I guess, mainstream Orthodox community in Toronto. I don't know exactly which shuls they end up in. That I don't know. But I can tell you that there are many that stick around. There are many that stick around. And I do want to mention, is it okay, Sam? Sam, can I? Okay, just because he's sitting here, and I just have to mention, Sam Strasser, he's actually a Talmud of Rabbi Karlinsky as well, right? And what's that? And Rabbi Black. So there you go. So this is perfect. You bring it all together. He's one of the BAYT who has stuck around in the community, and the amount of outreach that this couple does in staying in the community and creating an event. There's an event coming up where he has over 40, 50 young professionals coming to this event just to learn. I think it really puts it back on the community. Not necessarily, yes, it's always on the rabbis. What are the rabbis doing? But, from my perspective, it's just as much the community's responsibility as it is the rabbi's responsibility to take care of our fellow Jews. And so, the question of how do we create that atmosphere, how do we retain, how do we... I think it's a question we have to ask ourselves. I really do.
Mrs. Whitty?
So first of all, I wanted to speak in defense of Achai V'Rayotai. It does make a difference where you sit in the shul. If you sit on the second floor in the women's section, there are two people whose official position is to watch the doors, and the third person is me in the back row. And when a person comes into a shul, it is everybody's responsibility, not just mine, to look at the person and to see why are they here. You can tell when they come for a simcha, and maybe they want to be either left alone or just directed to the family. And you can also tell when they're a stranger, and that you have a responsibility to welcome them, to make sure that they have a sitter with an English translation, if that's what they're looking for. So, of course, it's on all of us. And I think some of us are doing it, and the ones who aren't, just open your eyes. Just look at the person, not at the unaffiliated, not at the guest, not at the community, but look at the person who's in front of you, and you won't have a question of what you should do. But my question is this. Unfortunately, I find myself in the other situation. I work with a lot of non-Jews, I work with unaffiliated Jews, I work with people for whom, okay, I'm representing the brand, and I have to be open, and I have to be accepting, and I have to say, yeah, whatever you're doing is great. Is there a line? Is there a point at which you have to say, actually, I can't agree with what you're doing. I can't accept what you're doing.
Give us an example. Driving to shul?
No, that's not my example. Okay, my example is recently, I had a number of coworkers who are very strict Christians, and who are very much against gay marriage. Okay? But it's a topic that comes up, and it was a topic of conversation. Thank God the Supreme Court of Canada made their decision 10 years ago, and we don't have to debate it anymore. But it's a topic that comes up when you're working, let's say, with somebody who you want to, on the one hand, represent that Orthodox Judaism is inclusive, open, loving, caring about other people. On the other hand, there are some things we don't go for. What about a colleague who is a Jewish person who's dating a non-Jew? Do I say to him, I met your girlfriend, she's lovely? Or do I say, I met your girlfriend, she's lovely, but?
All right, so listen, I had this conversation with a rabbi who's not here today. Let me give you a theoretical that's not so theoretical. Let's say a new family comes to the BAYT. He's Jewish and she's not halachically Jewish. She converted conservative, and she's not halachically Jewish, but she holds herself to be Jewish. What is our role? What role do we play in allowing a couple that is aspiring to be part of an Orthodox community? And how do we create welcoming without, at the same time, if we were totally, brutally honest, we would know that we would shut the door on them completely? That's really the question that you're asking. And I'm just rephrasing it on an institutional level. What?
No, I mean, as an institution, we have a different set of responsibilities.
Well,
yeah, as a person representing it.
Yes and no. I think it all relates to the same issue. Chacham einav birosho. You have to use chachma. You have to know the situation. You can't answer that question on a wholesale level. You have to know the person that you're speaking to. If the guy went to 12 years of day school and then went to a gap year in Eretz Yisrael, and now he's dating a non-Jewish girl, there's one response. Whereas if a person grew up completely secular, there's a totally different response. I will tell you that there, a rabbi who's also in a Kiruv shul, a different Kiruv shul in this community, had a dilemma that he wanted to speak out with me. He's got a couple that daven in his shul. The wife is not halachically Jewish, and they want to make a bar mitzvah in the shul. And the bar mitzvah is a year and a half off. And the rabbi knows that he can't bar mitzvah the boy. The boy's not halachically Jewish. So what is he supposed to do? They want to join the shul so that in a year and a half the boy can become bar mitzvah. So on the one hand, how can he allow this woman to become a member of the shul? She's not halachically Jewish. So I said to him, well, do you think that you can work with her so that eventually she'll be Magayer? He says, yeah, it's a possibility. I said, so then maybe it's worth it. I said, maybe it's worth bending the rules to allow this family to become members of the shul, because that way you have to make that assessment though. If you feel that will eventually bring them in.
But in Toronto, that could be a 3-5 year process, correct?
It could be, and you have to work with the facts that you have available to you. And if it doesn't work, then at some point you'll have to tell them, I don't think we're headed in the right direction. These are the things that I have to lay out for you at this point. But I don't think that there's one easy answer. It all depends. First of all, again, goes Rabbi Karlinsky's issue, you have to be emes. So if a person tells you, this is my boyfriend, and he's a boy, right? And he wants. So what do you think about gay marriage? You can't lie, but most people are not going to present that way. I think I've told from the pulpit the story about my son's neurologist, who was she was married to another lady, and we were so grateful to this woman for all the service that she provided to our son. We invited her to the Seder, and she said, "Can I bring my wife?" And I said, "Of course you can bring your wife, with pleasure," because they got married in a place where it was legal to get married. So we had them at the Seder. Did they ask me if I approved of the marriage or not? No. She even made disparaging comments about those Mormons, who are destroying the country because of their views on gay marriage. And I just smiled. What am I supposed to say? You're a sinner, repent, or you're going to hell. I mean, I can't. That's not how we deal with people. And there's a lot going on there. And I think that you have to just supply chachma, rabbis. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for coming.